When she kicked me out, she said, I love you, but I don't feel like I know you. And that's also how I feel about Dr. Pepper. So I put my head in the policeman's head hole. I thought about what she'd said, and I thought about her, and I realised I don't not know who I was anymore. I don't know who she is either. That's messed up. She's my wife. I should know who she is, right? You ever get like that? You ever wake up in the night, you look at your partner who's sleeping next to you, you study their face as they sleep and think, who are you? Well, I don't even know you. How'd you get here? When I first met her, she was perfect. I was at a party with my friend Daryl. She walked in, I was like, Daryl, you see that woman? I'm going to marry that woman. 6 months later, we were married. Which is the only time that's ever paid off for me. I used to say that a lot. It's perfect. I opened up a letter in my life. So years went by, I dropped my guard more and more. But as soon as my guard was all the way down, she changed, overnight. Undercover copped me. I didn't like how it felt to be undercover copped. There's a point in every single undercover cop case. You watch the target get suspicious. They go crazy, they get paranoid, reading too much into every detail of every day. I got anxious, needy and insecure. And you might be thinking, oh, just be yourself, mate. Be yourself. In a relationship, what if they don't like you, man? What if every relationship you've ever been in is just somebody slowly figuring out they didn't like you as much as they hoped they would?
Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. Today is the start of a brand new series that I am beginning. When I started Provocateur, my first guest was Jacob, who is Boat of Raw on Letterboxd. We opened with John Huston, which seems like a very long time ago now. And this new series is quite heavy and personal to me. I'm calling it the phenomenon of craving. And that's a term that's from the AA Big Book in the doctor's opinion, where they're talking about how once a craving is activated, that there are intense desires to do certain behaviors or use certain substances, and that once you start, you can't really stop. And I was thinking a lot about the way that Jacob and I's kind of emphasis sort of goes into that. What Jacob had suggested, which ended up being a very interesting journey, is looking at illusion and disillusionment in marriage and movies that show both those things. I think the illusion part is what will go into this sort of craving emphasis, where once I know for myself, I believed that marriage or relationships was supposed to look a certain way, or I wanted it to look a certain way. It was like off to the races. There was no changing it. And then once things don't align in that way, you think that they aren't what they should be. So Jacob and I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm really looking forward to doing this. I think it'll be very edifying for both of us.
Yeah, definitely. I think we had an initial conversation about, the behaviors or the ideas or the traits one learns from fiction, from movies, that you sort of learn how to be or how to not be from absorbing the stories around you. And some of that is good. And some of that is, you think is good at the time, and you look back on, and see as being maybe wrong. And that was kind of the initial conversation that we had, about this idea. And it was interesting for me to think about as we watched these movies, just the way that a relationship works in similar ways, that there's always, and each of these movies kind of has that, even when the relationships are good, there's a kind of mystery of the other. that is either what makes the relationship good or what makes it hard and painful. And that, it seems like that kind of comes from how we interact with movies and how we interact with stories, that you see the things a person does, and that becomes them, but also you fill in some of the mystery of them with things that you've seen elsewhere, with the way that relationships have been presented to you in the books you read and the movies that you watch. And that's how we negotiate, the world and our relationships. And by, kind of using those, you use your illusion.
and you use them almost to form your own expectations, right? Because like when you were talking about, so the first film that Jacob had brought up was The Thin Man, with William Powell from 34. And one of the things about that is that it gives you this beautiful, gorgeous dream of how like an equal partnership should be, or what it looks like when, a couple adores one another, even if, underneath it's like alcoholism and enabling, and it's completely unrealistic the way that they are going about unless they, just have tons of money. So there's so much of it that's not real, but it looks and feels like something that's attainable. And I think that's where it gets kind of dangerous.
It just is so, you like them so much. You're so attracted to them.
Right.
You're so, and we kind of talked about this, as we were watching it, that the movie just kind of makes you, as it is organized, it just makes you desire to be back in their presence. It gets so complicated, and the plot you just kind of tune out at a certain point. You're like, whatever's
like Clue, or
they'll solve it. I don't really care about following along with how. And you just want to be in the room as they interact with one another. And as you say, it's based on some obviously unreal, that in that initial scene when he's in the bar and he's, drinks a martini and orders another one, and she says, "How many is that?" And then orders the same number, "Bring me 5 and line them up one, right here." So they can be, as you say, they can be exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And then it cuts to, it's the only acknowledgement of, only kind of realistic acknowledgement of drunkenness in the movies. Then it shows you briefly that she has kind of a minor hangover after that, but it's just so quick, even and played as a punchline, that there's such a fantasy in that you could just endlessly consume, and that no one will, that your partner will not ever fight you on that, or keep you from doing that. Will make it easier, will enable it,
and will join you, actually. Like that's the ideal, is the joining part, where she's like, "Oh, give me as much as he does." And also, I think they're kind of in an endless state of tipsy. There's really no drunkenness. They're in the sweet spot of the process the whole time. So it also makes it seem like that's like attainable as a state, to just be in pure bliss and keep it controlled there,
Right. It's sort of like the honeymoon phase, like that they're both in this early genesis of what they're doing and what they're becoming, and it never leaves that. It struck me this time, I've seen the movie a handful of times on New Year's Eve. It's always on TCM on New Year's, and it struck me this time how chaste it is. They have that Ricky and Lucy bed set up, as if they're still kind of courting each. Obviously they're married, but as far as we see, they never have sex. And then the end is so that great, the dog covers his eyes, and they I don't know what those fold out train beds are called.
They have bunk beds, so it's still a little bit innocent.
Right.
You know,
But but they get into the same one, and even that is sort of so. Even when it becomes sexual, it's so kind of cutesy in beginning phase, and which is something that hasn't, I think, in common with Paterson in that way. Not to transition to that too soon, but there was that same kind of dynamic in that movie too. And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
They're equal, but there's also an interesting dynamic about the power relationship, that it's her money. He says early that he looks after, I think is the phrase he uses. I look after our interests. But even that is sort of played as a punchline, that the role that his detecting plays in their relationship is very interesting, because it's sort of not that they need to do it. It's just that they're attracted to it. This is an interesting case, so we want it. We want to do it,
That was literally what I was going to say, because I wrote down that you had texted me that they're detecting because it's in their nature to be attracted and drawn, even though it leads to what you called an endless capacity for nullifying, which I think is really insightful, because it's also that they're numbing. They're drawn, and there's this electricity, and there's this sort of feeling of like, we don't need this, but we're just doing this for fun. So there's a playfulness about it, but then at the same time, because they're drinking the entire film and they're not really aware of the stakes like the other couple is, they don't have nervousness, but it's not because they're not human beings. It's because they're literally cut off to it by the way that they're functioning. It's almost like they're not able to feel anything at all.
Yeah. And they fill in those gaps with wit, and with charm. But there is, as you watch it, you do suspect all along that other kind of shoe will drop at some point, and it's, well, really, he can't really be satisfied in this eternal cocktail hour, right? That they're actually bored and actually dissatisfied, but it just never shows you there's never any suggestion of that.
Right.
That even when, even the scene which is sort of another like sexual pun in the movie, where he's shooting his little pop gun on Christmas Day, aiming it in funny way, over his shoulder and through his legs, and shoots the window and stuff like that. And she's clearly, kind of irritated by it, but it's funny. It's not actual anger, and that that their play just keeps amusing themselves. They just keep amusing one another.
So maybe, so you said something that just brought me back to Anatomy of a Fall. We'll just merge all these together instead of doing them in order, but the scene where she's talking to her lawyer and she's speaking to the camera and they're interviewing her about her husband, when she talks about when she first met him and how he commanded a classroom and all of that, it's like, it's that first blush sort of thing that you're describing, right? Where she was in love with him, and she says, like, I felt that I understood him. I could meet him where he was at. And so maybe the danger of the Thin Man in this sense that we're discussing is it never shifts
right
to that aftermath. And so it makes it seem like if you just structured yourself correctly, you could always have a permanent, we get along, we excite one another, we have an exciting life, that you could somehow make that not just honeymoon phase, but like eternal phase.
Yeah.
As and whereas Anatomy of Fall shows that this morphs into this, which is definitely not in line with the fantasy.
Right. Yeah. And maybe you just need a few more cocktails, that it makes that suggestion. And of course,
right.
The movie, everyone else in the movie is in these more, not more realistic but more troubled kind of, there is the the couple that is getting married, and they're just anxious the whole movie, they're and the actors are bad, in the typical 30s way, maybe, but comparatively just so much less at home on screen than the leads. And yeah, that we watch movies and we know what we're seeing is not real, but it's so uh it's so tempting to, that's not how it feels, I guess, to me. It always, those those feelings are attractive to people because they're so effective at kind of establishing this illusion. I mean, movies are magical in that way. It's static images that happen in sequence, and so that create the appearance of motion. That's there's magic in that, and that this, some of that, our willingness to believe it, is a product of that. Sometimes I've sort of catch myself when you're talking about this, and I think like, well, I'm not, most of us are not stupid, and we know that you can't just, that a relationship changes, and you don't, you can't just drink all the time, but we're bombarded with suggestions otherwise, that we're constantly being exposed to stories that show us something else, including sometimes the bad, including things like how you're supposed to react when your partner hurts you, or when something difficult happens, and the thing about cheating as it shows up in some of these movies is, it always seems, it's always, the suggestion is that there's, kind of one way to respond to it, and it's to get angry and leave, and that becomes this kind of template for life, in some ways.
There's two things that you just reminded me of. One is that one of the illusions of Thin Man and Paterson is that if you just live your life in a certain way, that none of that will happen to you, which is not true.
Right.
But that is a very appealing notion, that you could avoid any catastrophe because of the way that you and your partner act and the way that you go about life. The second thing is, you reminded me of Purple Rose of Cairo. Have you seen that movie?
It's been a long time.
Okay. Well, that's a great one. About when you were describing the movies, I was thinking of Mia Farrow, and that her character is so obsessed with films, and she keeps going to the theater to escape her life. And then Jeff Daniels literally pulls her into the movie. Right. And it's like, now I can finally, so, I mean, especially for us who love movies, I mean, this is a real thing. That's why I wanted to talk about this in terms of this craving, because, when I've watched movies young, and they put an imprint on me, they made me feel like, in a real way about relationships, like this is my type and this is the sort of thing that I want. And when I saw Paterson, it was like, oh my gosh, that seems like this, ideal, and that if you just go about life in these certain senses, you could have it, and it's just an ordinary life. So there it is, but I still think that's an illusion.
Yeah, well said. That's super interesting. And maybe say one more thing about Thin Man, and then we should talk about Paterson. That it also create, that movie creates this impression, and maybe even just sort of the comedy from that era, that this is the way to charm people around you. You should not let things hurt you. That moment, it really stuck out to me. It's so funny when he's comforting the I think it's the daughter whose father is presumed dead. They're hugging, and his wife walks in the room, and sort of catches them in this
and
moment.
He goes,
but he just makes a funny face.
Yeah.
And she just kind of, has some response to it. It's so charming. It's like, a great example of the charm that the thing that they share and establish together. And it, that kind of thing does also create this impression that like, well, if that's not how you would react, maybe you're wrong, to react that way. You doubt, when people behave differently than at least I have always assumed that I'm wrong, that
right.
My feelings must be wrong because that's not how other people do it. And when I say other people, I mean people in movies sometimes. And
when you're kind of illustrating something that's in both movies, which is that the moment that the woman has even a hint of jealousy, the guy's like, no, this isn't that. Because she does in Paterson, she's like, oh, you were talking to a girl about a poem. And he's like, oh, no, she's like 12. She was a little girl. Yeah. And she's like, oh, but they have this like very precious level of trust where even though the women are just a tad bit, oh, wait, the guys are like, oh my gosh, I would never even dream of, you're the only one for me. And it would never be that implication. And all it takes is just like one line or one facial expression to sort of quell that insecurity and eradicate it. And so that is another thing that it's like, if you just were with your equal and you were crazy about one another, that any sort of jealousy could be dismissed within a moment. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of that. I think that's that narrative is what it's saying.
Yeah, definitely. And that movie sets like kind of just the only drama in the movie is that it sets up moments that might be dramatic and then refuses to make them dramatic. That, you think like, oh, he's going to say something mean about this Brussels sprout pie because clearly he's not that into it, but then it just is, he just eats it, and we're left to kind of puzzle out, why did I think that would be something? There'd be something, there must be about to be some. I understand why people would call that movie dull or would kind of have a negative reaction to it, because it just, nothing dramatic ever happens until his poems get shredded, which we can talk about. But even that is sort of becomes just sort of a Zen moment. And
in both instances, really the dramas outside of them, they have no problems. It's just that like, the couple outside of the Nick and Nora Charles are kind of, bickering and then they go to that guy's house and the woman like wants to throw him out because he's been cheating. And so there's relationships around them that are very tense.
Right.
And in Paterson, the one at the bar, with the bartender and his person, and then with Chidi from Good Place and his person. So it's always external, but we never get a sense that anything could possibly penetrate these people. They're like fortresses in the midst of relational strife.
Yeah. And they have their separate making practices. They have their separate art practices, Paterson and what's
her
name?
Oh my gosh.
I'm not sure that we do, but we must. I don't know.
I'll have to look it up for you while you're talking, but continue. I'll look it up for you.
But they have their separate practices. He writes his
poems. Artistic, yeah.
Yeah, and she makes these black and white things that is interesting in a subtle way, kind of slowly take over the domestic space. You don't really notice them at first, and then by the end of the movie, you're like, these weird patterns are all over their house.
I know.
And her kind of flighty, I want to be a country singer, I want to be a cupcake entrepreneur, she has these different things, but they're all sort of just allowed to happen. Like their house is a place where those things can happen.
And he has no criticism towards her ever. He's never like, what are you thinking? You can't do that. I mean, it's literally, he's the perfect, like, encourager, producer person, where it's like you pitch this artistic idea, this dream. She talks about dreams a lot. Laura's her name, by the way.
Laura
talks about dreams, and then he's like, oh, he's so interested and just not down on. He really believes that she could do anything she wants, I think.
Right. I should have remembered Laura because the Petrarch.
Because
Yeah.
We watched. Well, and they tie in Paterson so much. Like, it's Paterson, New Jersey. His name is Paterson. William Carlos Williams writes a book about Paterson. I think she says something about Laura. What does she say, that her name is the same as?
It was Petrarch's muse, basically.
Okay.
This woman he was obsessed with and wrote poems sort of to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, there's tons of things that keep coming back in Paterson too. It's almost like the universe is just like Thin Man. Actually, the universe is like there to sort of make them blossom. Like, it's contributing things that reinforce their commitment to one another, as opposed to our culture, which is constantly trying to get us to see other possibilities or think our relationship sucks.
Do you think it's that? That's interesting. Yeah. Do you think it's that? Or do they make it into that? You know, as you said, that in Thin Man, it sort of creates this impression that if we made the choices that they made, we could stay as they do, you know? And so I wonder if it is that these illusions are that they live in a different world, in a more imaginary world than the one we live in. And I do think Paterson feels that way. It feels like a very similar but almost science fiction place, you know, where it like the real Paterson, New Jersey does not feel the way this movie feels.
But that's the question. Are we interpreting it that way? Whereas
right.
Paterson, wherever Paterson was, he would see that. That's the question.
Right. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. Yeah.
The way that they are doing this creative thing separately but together that allows them to see it that way. You know,
exactly.
As she says it, it just sort of is a tossed off line, but it to me was kind of the thesis of the movie that she said is in reference to, you know, a curtain project that she's completed or some other decorative thing that she's done in the house, and says, it just makes everything more interesting, don't you think? And I was kind of like, that's the movie, really, is that we do this. I just sit down and I write these things, and that act does make the world around me more charged up, because I'm seeing things that, you know, might come into that process in it now. I'm sort of just, my attention is now in a more vulnerable, generous place because we do this thing. I don't know if that makes sense quite, but
no, it does, because when they bring things up, there's so many things in the movie. I think I made a list of them, but there's multiple things where Laura will say something like she mentions that they were going to have twins, right? She had a dream that she got pregnant with twins, and then Paterson literally sees twins the whole rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And it's like, were they there anyway, or is he just, you know, are they there because of the dream, or is he noticing them because of the dream?
Right.
It doesn't much matter. But then there's like the William Carlos Williams thread with the Japanese gentleman at the end with the bench. There's tons of things. There's something about a fireball where like somebody says something, and then the bartender, the waterfall poem, and then she gets the picture with the waterfalls. So there is this very intriguing question to me, which is, if you're at home and your consciousness is a certain way, and then you go out into the world, is the state that you're in literally, I mean, this is getting into like where people talk about manifesting and, you know, you attract what you are or whatever. But I mean, maybe it's just that your awareness is keyed up differently. And then
I think the movie does suggest that is kind of what's happening, or how, and maybe it's true that detecting works in the same way in Thin Man, that they share in this third thing together, apart from them. That there's an essay by the poet Donald Hall, who was married to the poet Jane Kenyon, and they lived in this kind of homestead in New Hampshire, his family farm, a very, you know, sort of whimsical setting, and, you know, a town of like 200 people or something, where his family had lived for generations. And they just, you know, lived in this house and wrote poems. And and he wrote an essay called "The Third Thing" or something like that. That's the idea of the essay is that a marriage needs a third thing other than the two people. That it requires something through which you triangulate each other, with each other. And that poetry was their third thing, obviously maybe, but that they're sharing this together as a thing separate from themselves, is how their marriage worked, is why it worked. And I think both of those kind of, and it's, I think, also true. I found that essay very beautiful the first time I read it before I was married to a poet, which I am too. And now I think it's common to see that essay, and there's a famous criticism of it that the Poetry Magazine published, where it was like, this is very much his perspective on their marriage. She felt often smothered and condescended to by him, and cheated on him 3 or 4 times, and he knew about it. And so there was even that idea, I think, in kind of thinking about this disillusion concept. There's something maybe tidy about that. They'll just make, just have a creative pursuit, and that will make the world transformed, which I'm sort of so attracted to. I have really in many ways structured my entire life around that idea, and that's why I would really appreciate you recommending that movie. I had never seen it, and you were like, you got to,
it's your bag.
And I very much felt that way. And I've always liked Jim Jarmusch movies, I think, for the most part, but more recent ones, I don't know. There have been a couple I just haven't made the effort to see. But you're
also really reminding me of Bergman, because that's what you're painting is something that I've always felt is an ideal too, and it just doesn't work. Like Bergman in his life, he had a lot of women, right?
Yeah.
But he had like that, like, oh, we have, I have my actress and I have like Liv Ullmann, and they have that creative outlet, but it didn't mean that they could be married, and it didn't mean that they, these things are like what we wish as artists, I think, and creative types. We wish that the writing or the poetry or the muse that we have in common would equal sort of a practical representation of fidelity, and it doesn't. And I think a lot of artists actually prove that over and over, that is just not the case. Like, you know what I mean? And I mean, maybe they're all nuanced in their straying, but I don't think that means what we wish it. I don't think it implies what we wish it did, which is sort of an exclusive intimacy.
Yeah, well said. I wrote down this is the relationship therapist Esther Perel. I read one of her books a while ago. I wrote this down. Every couple has to negotiate the other's erotic independence as part of the larger conversation about our individuality and our connection. In our efforts to protect ourselves, we run the risk of eradicating the very space between us that keeps desire alive. And I think that's kind of what you're saying partially too, that we, that what draws us together sometimes is kind of what smothers that charge that attracts us to one another, in the first place. That what's hard about being together is that we require some distance, and that is hard. That's just hard to figure out, And
I think also if you put it on art to be your third thing, then you can have that third thing with a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
It makes it so that, okay, like the way that Nick and Nora Charles are and the way that Paterson and Laura are, you get the feeling that they only want that person. And so the art is perhaps an expression of that love, but they don't just want the creative symbiosis or the kindred spirit creativity part.
Yeah.
That comes secondary to wanting this individual person specifically. Because if you rely on, like, you know, if you're thinking about it in terms of, I want to be one with someone who understands the same things I do artistically, there's a lot of people that can do that for you. And then what do you do when you meet one? Because then it's all about that part, that function, that somebody could do it better than the person you're with can.
Yeah.
So I think it's, you know, that's kind of the danger of that intoxication or pursuit, is that there's a lot of people who can fulfill it, and perhaps, you know.
Yeah. And that if what's core to you is your art, is your identity as an artist, you know, you feel that you have you sort of feel that you have the right to that. I think, you know, that you have, if I'm a good writer, I want to be around the best writers. You know, I want to get everything I can, you know, from life. You know, I understand that, you know, very much. I think
it reminds me so much of Bergman, but there's so many examples of this, especially with like actors and actresses, where it's just like, you know, I want to follow whoever I'm intrigued by, and Paterson and Thin Man are sort of slamming that into what I think we actually do want. I don't think we want the Closer Anatomy of Fall stuff where,
certainly, yeah.
But they both are not super helpful ultimately in showing us the way. I guess maybe that's what I'm getting at. Like, what is the way to get the ideal?
Yeah. Oh, I wish I knew. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So you also hadn't seen Closer, Jacob.
No, I'd never seen it.
So what were your impressions?
This was an important movie for you. I was interested in hearing you talk about it, as you you wrote a little bit about it. I was most interested in the structure of it, how it, you know, kind of presents these it leaves almost everything of their actual relationships, their lives together out, you know, that you just see kind of very flirtatious beginnings and very dramatic conclusions, but not really conclusions, as sort of transitions between the partnerships that recombine in these different ways. And I thought that was just interesting how it did that, you know, that you know, sort of as if to suggest, you know, the opposite of what I think a lot of people believe, where your relationship is about the mundane, is, you know, how you are together, and in those, you know, Paterson Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Fridays. That's real life. You know, that's that it's not like a movie. That's, you know, Paterson suggests that's just the mundane is where the relationship is. You know, but Closer suggests, well, what if it's really just who you are in these moments, where something terrible is happening or something exciting is beginning. I just thought that was sort of curious. I don't know if I agree with that, or if I like that, or if I believe that, but I thought it was provocative to see it kind of represented in that way.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, since most of Closer is about affairs, or at least like, so one of the things I think is interesting is that I think that the characters in Closer are trying to get to what Paterson has. Mm-hmm. All their conversations are about, like, when are you going to leave him? When are you going to leave her? You know, when can we be normal? When can we have this day-to-day Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday thing, instead of these spurts of indiscretions and stress? And, you know, so it's interesting that, like, in that film, it seems like they're saying these exciting things are actually agonizing, and they're not, you know, they're not great. They're trying to get to a normalcy that they just can't get to because they're all so screwed up. But I think they do actually want Maybe. I don't know about Jude Law's character. Dan seems like a romantic that would literally never be happy no matter what he had, because he would always be wanting something else. I don't know. But that's another thing of the creative, right? Is just insatiability, not being
Right.
content.
This is a word from Anatomy of a Fall, but the word she supposedly steals the idea, the word is plunder.
Plundering.
You know, and that was one aspect of Closer. I kind of didn't know what to do with that. He sort of uses the life of his girlfriend, you know, to write this novel that then is not received well, you know, that there's something there that is curious. It makes me curious, you know, where I'm like, what is that suggesting about him or about the nature of their relationship or the nature of relationships? And I kind of kept going back to this idea that, you know, of fiction, you know, there always just is, as you know, in a relationship that's close or in a relationship of acquaintance, there is some level of remove. There is some fiction in our you know, in us, that our memories are fraudulent mostly, you know, maybe not mostly, but often we don't remember things perfectly, and we embellish and remember things in ways that maybe make us into this, you know, sympathetic party and things like that. And you know, insofar as he's creating fiction from the real life of another.
What do you think about this idea? Just struck me. What do you think about the idea of someone feeling that the reality that they bring into their art is actually more real than what is? Like, so
Yeah.
Paterson writes about Laura in his poetry, and the way that he writes about her is way, way more romantic than how he acts towards her, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He's a lot more, I wouldn't say erotic, but along the lines of like, he's very like, you know, if she left me, tear out my heart and leave it on the ground. But then when he's interacting with her, he does not come across as somebody who feels that way at all.
Yeah.
So it's almost like, and then in Anatomy of a Fall, it's the same thing, where I feel like they have way more passion and I don't know, interest in their work than they do for the actual people. And then why? It's almost like, are they just using each other for fuel to make something? And I don't know. When you're talking about blurring the lines of fiction and reality, I think, what are we doing there?
Right. Yeah. I wondered that all through and I don't know what it says about maybe a prurient thing inside me, or where I just kept being like, are they going to have sex? Are they ever going to,
I know,
you know, like what,
no.
and that, you know, they have this routine where, he goes to the bar every night when after dinner. He goes to the same bar and sits there for what seems like a while, you know, because then it implies that he comes back home and she's asleep and she likes the smell of him. And that's the sexiest thing in the movie, you know, really. And it occurred to me while I was watching it that I was like, they're actually not together very much. He comes home and there's these brief interactions in the morning and in the evening, and the movie shows you a lot of that, but actually in that whole week, that time doesn't add up to all that much time that they're spending with each other, that they're actually, he's at work all day, they have a few hours in the evening, and then he goes out again, and that kind of struck me as curious, that just what it elides from their relationship, and it is the erotic in some ways, which
It's also that you're saying that distance, it's almost like distance, because you texted me saying like they make space for creativity. Maybe it's not that they make space, maybe it's that they make distance.
yeah. And similarly, Closer is a sort of a sexy movie, I guess, but in which there's no sex.
Right.
Or that it's the whole presentation.
It's a lot of talking.
The movie is very sexual. It seems like, I remember kind of having that impression. I was like, well, this is like a very, and then you're like, well, but it actually is very argumentative. It's mostly just about arguments, kind of elevated emotional states.
Well, when Clive Owen says to her, like, to me, the key to the entire movie is when he says, what do I need to do to get a little intimacy around here?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do I need to do? Like, why are we not able to connect?
Yeah.
Like, everybody in the movie is saying a lot of very vulnerable, seemingly revealing, blunt things about sex and about their indiscretions and all of those things. But there isn't actual intimacy. And maybe Paterson is like, maybe if we want to say that that's like sex without intimacy, and then Paterson is intimacy without sex, because there's this affection. And, he gets his clothes out the night before. He covers her with the blanket. It's very sweet and wholesome, but you're right. They're almost, in the way that you were describing how they're not together, that is kind of how affairs are. Like in Closer, they weren't together. So maybe they actually aren't together in the mundane.
Right.
Like, you're making me rethink it now.
In Closer, you mean?
Yeah.
Not together in the Monday. Yeah. Right. That we're not seeing that because it's not happening.
Right. But that's like what keeps their passion going.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I did sort of wonder, I would have liked the movie more if it had done something which I think would be more provocative, because I really liked where I thought it was going, where I was like, they're going to work themselves into some kind of, like, we're just a complicated group of 4 people. and we all know about all of each, we all, and there are, I think, like, polyamorous terminology for whatever that would be now, but I thought it was which I'm maybe not that interested in, but I thought it was just curious to suggest that, like, well, why can't 4 people just be with each other in this kind of weird, complicated way that pings and pongs a little bit and changes. And, the moment that I liked the most from the movie is where Dan goes to see Larry, is the doctor. Right?
Yeah.
And he says, thank you for being kind.
I am kind.
And I just thought, I was like, this is really, that was very interesting to me. That whole interaction. And I sort of wished, I wished maybe at times for more moments of mundane, it kind of is just like peak to peak to peak to peak in that movie. But, I kind of was interested, like, can they, sometimes I have this stupid, like, thought sometimes in movies where I'm like, can they just sit down and eat dinner and calm down for a little bit? Can we just have a low key atmospheric Tarkovsky moment, but that scene to me was a little bit like that, where you thought, oh, is there going to be a fist fight here? The 2 men are confronting each other, that this could be dramatic, but it is sort of vulnerable in a way that I liked,
Yeah. And it also kind of highlights what you're saying about, like, you wish they could all just be together. The problem with them is that they're also jealous, and they're also, they just want to be with one person, and they want that one person to just be with them. It's quite traditional in a sense, and it's very monogamous. It's very, like, they really don't want to share one another with each other at all.
Right.
And they want to, I think with Larry, like with Clive Owen's character, he wants to one-up him.
Mm-hmm.
He cannot stand that this, like, loser who writes obituaries and failed novelist, please, he can't stand that guy would get his wife.
Right.
So it's more of a competition there, I think.
Right.
And then I think Natalie Portman's character too, Alice, she wants to win. She doesn't want, I'm the one who leaves,
Mm-hmm.
She's insulted. Her pride is insulted.
Right. That the desire to, what Esther Perel calls that desire to protect, that the individual, that um, you're also looking out for yourself and protecting yourself, and that sometimes that comes to the fore. It felt like that. It felt like the movie did ultimately really want to show you, and that scene where Larry does the single worst thing in that circumstance you can do, where it's just like, I'm going to get real forensic about the, my anger. What did you do? Did you do this?
What did you do? When? Where? Yeah.
And I have a great line, I thought, too, where she ends by saying, like you, but sweeter.
Sweeter.
It was a wish you had thought of that, or I did.
I think that even that in itself is a fantasy. Like there's a movie I love by Preminger, Daisy Kenyon, where Joan Crawford's in love with two guys at the same time, Henry Fonda and Dana Andrews, and they all literally just sit around and talk about it.
Yeah.
And they discuss it extremely calmly.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I like you for these reasons, and you and that is such a fantasy to me. That is, I mean, that's one where I can't even say that I've ever known anybody to do it, but you kind of wish, the Clive Owen thing of like, tell me everything. I want to know everything for real so that I can let it go. You kind of wish that would work in life, that you could have that level of closure with people and not be hurt by it, mm-hmm. or somehow get out okay. But
all of these movies, I think, have, the mind is an ungovernable place. It can be. The imagination, can be.
Right.
And, and it also is the place where creativity happens, where the erotic occur, and that the distance and the mystery is essential to all of that. That what attracts us to other people is that we don't know them sometimes, that there is an illusion of the other that is what draws us to them, and that but that we want to the things we do attempt to collapse that all the time, kind of constantly. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, no, it does. And I think it's also interesting that I was just thinking, like, Paterson is two creatives, and then Anatomy of Fall is two writers. I told you this last night. I was like, the movies that we picked sort of intermittently, or whatever that word is, inadvertently were people who were sort of drawn to that. And then in Anatomy of Fall, it totally does not work for them to both, because that sense of competition comes in.
Yeah. That scene where they have the fight is the single most painful movie scene I've ever watched.
I was like, Jacob, why do you want to do this to me again?
There's a lot of, there's not a movie I'm less interested in watching than a courtroom drama. It's like, as a genre, not for me. So that I find this movie as kind of interesting as I do is a real, I think, testament to how interesting it is. And a lot of it has to do with really that one scene where he's been making these recordings, and then it starts playing, and then it just kind of cuts to showing this fight that they have that just like cuts so deeply.
What about it stands out to you? Because I want to know what, besides the obvious that we've all had conversations and it felt very authentic, was there anything that really, I don't know, that you felt was especially unique in its power?
I think his name, I wrote it down, the husband who dies.
Samuel,
yeah.
She says Samuel.
That he has built up this this hard shell of resentment based on his time, and for writing is hard, is just so close to yourself, but also so far away from yourself, that like it feels like when you write things, it feels very personal. Obviously, everybody feels that, I think, who writes anything. But it also, uh, despite that, is something that exists outside of you and stands independent from you. And if it's good, it has to stand up in that, and it is just, that is hard. That is just hard. It's painful, to write is very difficult. And that he has, I feel like I just know exactly how he feels. And I know exactly how she feels in that fight too, where she's just like, don't talk to me about your fucking time. Like, make more time. What are you like,
No one's stopping you.
Who's making you do these things
Right.
that you do? Even right now we're fighting and you're just wasting time. That fight is ultimately about their free time from one another and their responsibilities to their art, to this thing that they see as being core to themselves. And that he has come to blame her for his failures, is just so painful to see. I think, it's, the nice thing about the reason I started wanting to write poems was that I was like, I kind of really want to be like a rock star or something, but there's a lot of gear you need, you gotta, it's expensive. And you got to live in Los Angeles or someplace like that, it seems. But like, to write poems, you just need a piece of paper and a pencil. You don't need anything. You can just do it. But that's in exchange for you, that it kind of pressure where it's like, but you always have to do it. If you're not doing it, it's not for lack of resources. It's just because you are not doing it. And there's kind of a pressure in that, Paterson makes it look so easy, because he doesn't have a cell phone probably. But,
and it just flows.
Yeah.
Like, she has a line where she's like, there's a huge difference between a concept or an outline and a 300-page novel.
Yeah.
She's like, I wrote the 300-page novel,
Yeah.
and you wrote an outline. This is where it always comes up, the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
Where you're an artistic person, you're a creative person, you have these ideas and grandeur and all, but then you have to do a lot of grunt work.
Right. Yeah.
And the grunt work could completely derail.
Yeah.
I think that Samuel would have been derailed no matter what, because he just didn't have it within him to do uncomfortable, annoying, the parts of it that nobody wants to do but has to do if they put it out there.
Yeah. I think what's great about that fight is that you can see that they're both right.
Yeah.
That they're both, you can just totally see both of their realities. That he's just like, you don't do as much parenting as I do, and I resent that. And she's just like, that, all you do is complain, and it's because you don't have that thing inside you where you could take away anything from me and I would still find the time to write.
Exactly.
Real art. And that they're just both you can see like, okay, both of these things are true in this moment. And it just I think hurts, to be exposed to that in that way. I love that about that movie and that relationship, that you kind of, and I think maybe it works as a courtroom drama too, because I don't care if she's found guilty or not, really.
I don't care. And I don't care if she did it or not either.
Right. It seems totally beside the point.
Right.
And that seems so, I jotted down, I think, some lines that stood out to me about this kind of illusory nature of relationships. This, your memories are all you're sure of. The court appointed ward says to Daniel at one point, after he's run this kind of sad experiment on the dog. That's so moving, I think, that whole sequence. And we judge facts, not books, is said in the same movie. Like that it presents both of these things, like that your memory is not, your mind is not where facts lie. It's in it's in facts, but then your memories are all you're sure of. do you think one can only write from experience? Just this like idea of the recording too, that it, once it kind of in that scene, it does present this as objective, that we're getting the testimonial now, like this is untouched by anyone's telling of it. But even that is ambiguous. You watch it and you think it, and actually only muddies the whole story. It doesn't. It makes it more complicated, not less, to know the truth.
And that's kind of what she says to Daniel, or she either says it to Daniel or the lawyer, where she's like, this one thing does not prove the whole thing. Yeah. Like she says to Daniel, I chose your father, we loved each other, but how do you prove that? And then she tells the lawyer, like, this one recording seems like it's the end all be all picture of their relationship. But she's like, so it's like, yes, how do you, but we want to, though. We want to look at something and be able to assess it in a normal way that we would assess something else. Like if you brought your car to the mechanic, he can assess what is wrong with the car, what areas need to be fixed. Yeah. They're replaced, and then the car runs.
Yeah.
And I think we want to approach sort of a relational disintegration that ends in somebody being dead by saying, what happened here? It's almost like not an anatomy of a fall, but like autopsy of a fall. Yeah. You're taking the dead relationship and you're trying to study it and see what happened and where did it go wrong.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really let us do that.
And just that things can all be, things that seem irreconcilable can be true. That a guy can be suicidal and have been murdered, and not have killed himself. A relationship can be bad and loving. That these things can in different moments be true to one or more of the people involved. Good people cheat on their spouses, and good marriages fall apart. All of that is complicated and true. But we don't want, but as you say, I think we want it to work like a movie. We want it to be simple. We want there to be villains. We want there to be causes and effects. We want all that to just follow in a logical way. And when it doesn't, that's very upsetting.
And I think we're just uncomfortable with paradox. This is what I think is like, paradox is holding those two opposing ideas sort of in union.
Yeah.
And then kind of allowing for a third option. This is in a book I'm reading about the shadow side, where if you have two opposing thoughts in your head about yourself or about something that you're going to do, you hold the thoughts and then you wait for a third answer. So like, I want to read my book right now, but I also want to take a walk. What should I do? And then instead of providing an answer or making an excuse, you just sit there with those two options for like 10 minutes. Go do something else and just sit there. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to do this. And then it's just like this idea of like, if you can just stay with a paradox, that an answer will arise eventually. And it might not be either one. Like it may not be like, I'm bad, but I also love you. It could be some, I don't know, not necessarily like merge, but something else that we're not able to think of on our own. Like we're almost like Paterson, like where he's being led. Like something brilliant you said, which is true about his poetry, is that the important thing was not the poems themselves, is that he wrote them.
Yeah.
And so he comes to that because the Japanese man sits there and gives him literally a blank notebook. He may not have realized that ever, possibly, on his own. So that whole idea, again, of like waiting for, maybe we just don't know things and we have to have conversations with people or we have to have experiences. And those are the things that show us a way for the two opposing things to lead us somewhere.
Yeah, well put.
So in Anatomy of a Fall, I don't know what that is because he dies, and so there's no chance. They don't have any reconciliation opportunity.
Yeah, and maybe it's the child, in that that movie is none of the others
Good point.
involve children, and
that's right.
And that movie does in a way that's also, like writing, parenting is very strange, because you just see this person that is you, and is not you also, in ways that are, reflect all your fear and all your goodness too. That it's a beautiful thing, but it's a terrifying thing. That child is in that movie is that kid who plays that character is wonderful, and so sympathetic, and so I mean, I think what's weird about kid actors often is that they're too precocious. They're just too. It's odd because they're like too smart or too articulate, and he is a little bit like that. But it is what. It's so tragic because he's trying so hard to kind of fit this situation that he's totally out of his depth for, but that I became the drama of that movie, to me, very much becomes what is going to happen to him or with him.
Right.
And that he's kind of caught in this, this situation is, to me, became kind of the most important part of it. Is he going to be okay? Where
is he going to be? Well, and then also how their different views of the accident contributed to how they treated him, contributed to how they got along. Mm-hmm. Like, there's the whole thing of, if they were in closer, maybe they would have stayed together for the kids, which is what so many people do. Right. But staying together for the kids also means that they're witnessing all of the turmoil and collateral damage. I mean, it's not as though staying together means that the kid is fine. Yeah. When they're witnessing such rage and resentment, and I mean, it's just seeped into everything. I mean, Daniel knows, like, just because they're staying together does not mean he's shielded at all. Yeah. From anything. So that's another illusion that I think that Anatomy of Fall sort of just breaks. Mm-hmm. That just because you're physically present does not at all mean that it's a better scenario for this person. Mm-hmm. But also the inverse is true too. That, like, running off with whoever, because Anatomy of Fall is also about cheating. Mm-hmm. That he cannot. He's like, what does he say? He's like, I'm a man who's been
cheated on. Yeah.
Plundered and cheated on.
Yeah.
So, but then she sees it as like, it's so different for her. Like a practical, what does she say? That it's for hygiene.
Yeah. Right. And and you can see, I mean, I wrote down, just as I kind of skipped back through some of the just memorable scenes this morning. And I wrote down, that PIMP steel pan song that just bores into your brain in the first 15 minutes of the movie. You're just like, this is actually going to drive me crazy hearing this. And the sound of the power tools. I was like, you have wounded masculinity in just too little details. Just the stomping around, running power tools aimlessly, playing this irritating song on repeat, that I sort of admire her characters, that hygiene line, just sort of being like,
I just had to.
This is part of life, and I want, and you are unwilling to have it. seemingly,
Accommodate.
And I think there's
Uh-huh.
probably a justification for cheating there too. That has problems, of course, but still, you can see how much of him in that fight scene, especially, is just this wounded pride, is just this kind of wounded masculinity, this wounded. I'm a man who, obviously can't get past that, that's happened, and that's just kind of shattered his illusion of himself. He's not a writer. He's not a
good lover or a
not a
whatever
man.
you want to say.
He's
right.
just and they even say late in the movie, the idea that a famous writer killed her husband is more interesting than that a teacher killed himself. And I was like, oh, that just, as a teacher and a writer too,
and a writer,
I see that completely, that I was just like, yeah, nobody, they're not a more condescended to profession than teachers. That is this idea that it's like glorified daycare. I think a lot of people have, and people speak about it reverently at times, at the same time as they, well, I won't, maybe I'll.
No, I understand. And I was going to ask you, I mean, if we were to try to coalesce all these things to wrap, if we're trying to get out of illusion, but we're also trying to avoid being in a situation where we are disillusioned, because I think Closer and Anatomy of Fall are basically like, you don't want to get into the scenario where all of a sudden the rug is pulled up from under you and you've been, sleeping with somebody who you don't even know, and or destroyed by them. But I know that the bottomless, that we can just maintain this level of honeymoon stage forever. But what do you think would be? Is there a medium, or is there a way in which to welcome reality and sort of embrace reality, but not lose, what did you call it? That like erotic independence, or that respect and connection and intimacy that's also dependable somehow, as well as romantic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if these movies assemble in an answer to that question quite. But often I think maybe not Thin Man as much as the other movies, but maybe even Thin Man to some degree. The thing about it, we were just talking about this, the wounded thing in all of the situations is about pride, is about the kind of individual, and your sense of in Closer, that they want to win, or they want to save face, or maintain their dignity, and that maybe that's not important. That I don't know, maybe that the attempt to guard one's self is also what a student put this to me in a very articulate way. I think said, if you never go out in a thunderstorm, you never get wet. And I was like, that's beautiful. Jesus, write that down. And I think, but because I was like, well, the consequence of that is that you never see it. If you stay inside all day, just because it's raining means you stay inside all day. And somewhere between those two perspectives is, I think, what feels to me the right way to live. That you can't protect yourself completely, or you will never love. And that it's just true that to make yourself vulnerable, to make yourself addressable, to put yourself in a position to be loved, it puts you in a position to be hurt, and that will happen, and that makes it no less essential.
It's like that C.S. Lewis quote, like, to love at all is to be vulnerable, and if you cut yourself off, you'll become something worse, which is impenetrable.
Yeah.
And you're just cold and alone and, inaccessible. But what Jesus said reminded me of, like, Bilbo Baggins. Like, it's a dangerous thing going out your front door.
Yeah.
Frodo says, quoting him.
I saw you just watch Lord of the Rings.
I know. I just watched Fellowship. It's so good. I was thinking about that too with this whole addiction stuff. Is like the ring and that that enticement and that familiarity of these stories that we want to believe. I feel this way about cinema in a way that sometimes I'm like, my precious. I want to keep these scenes or these depictions and actually have them be represented in reality. And it's like Gandalf, where he's like, when he tries to give him the ring, he says, I dare not take it, even to keep it safe. That's how I'm becoming, where it's like there's certain things that I just cannot, if I entertain them, it will take me to a bad place and wield power more imaginable, or whatever he says, that the ring would use him for evil.
This will be an interesting series to listen to for me, as you explore the various threads of that, how we are seduced by these kind of illusions and things that draw us to them, and at the same time as maybe hurt us, there's a lot to learn.
Or maybe we find them not to be true. Yeah. Like we find out that, and then what do we do? How do we reconcile those things?
Yeah.
So we really don't have a solution. Yeah. We have a glimpse of a solution, and maybe it's enough that we know what not to do.
If you figure it out, email it to me, because
and then I'll make $1 billion. The illusion solution. Well, Jacob, thank you very, very much. I hope that this has been an interesting conversation for you. And I think that we were both able to see a lot of ourselves in these characters. And I'm glad that you, if anything, nothing else, you saw Paterson.
Oh, it was amazing. Great. Yeah. Won't be the last time.
Yeah.
Thank you for recommending it. And thanks as always it's great to talk to you and be on the show.
With that, guys, we'll see you at the movies.